all my spiritual children who are here today, and to all your families, wherever they may be, and some are outside Tajikistan, I give my most affectionate loving blessings. And to my brothers and sisters in Islam here and in those areas of Badakhshan, which I will not be visiting, be assured that my deep and heartfelt prayers are with you for your peace, your unity, and your happiness. I pray also for the eternal peace and rest of the souls of all the deceased members of your families. Kanavada, Kanavada, Kanavada. To all my beloved spiritual children, and to my Muslim brothers and sisters, at the end of this mulaqat, I convey to you my prayers for Mushkil Islam, for peace, for the resolution of your worldly problems, for strength in the practice of your faith, and for unity amongst all of you. And though I will be leaving you physically in some days, remember that at all times you are in my heart, in my thoughts, and in my prayers. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa
welcome et bienvenue. My name is Shaheed Devji, and I'm really excited to be hosting Friday Night Reflections today. Welcome to our Jamat, welcome to the multi-faith family members, and welcome to everybody from across the globe who's tuning in today. I'm joining you from Vancouver, Canada, where it is cold. It's really cold. It's colder than we're used to here in Vancouver. I think it was -3 today, and with the wind chill, maybe -10, -15. It was cold. It's winter. We should expect it to be cold, but here in Vancouver, we're not used to this. And wait, what's that I hear? I hear you from the prairies. I hear you up north. I hear you out east. I hear you everywhere in Canada except here, making fun of me, laughing. It's not cold, you're saying. And I get it. -3, -10 with wind chill, not so cold in other places, but we're not used to that here. I'm actually happy to be here home inside, safe from all the COVID outside. I'm a bit nervous though to show you my home office. This is my home office. This is where I've spent the majority of the last 12 months after COVID hit. And I'm actually pretty lucky to be here because I've been able to work from home, and this is also my playroom. As you can tell, I've got some instruments behind me, and I quite like this room, but I was nervous to show it to you because every week on Friday Night Reflections, I see a new host showing off their great background. And it's like they're comparing their backgrounds to each other each week. Let's take Zara, for example. Zara always has these interesting books behind her, sometimes changes her bookcases. She seems very intelligent. And Kamil, my good friend Kamil from Toronto, I know he tidied up his place a lot to make it look like the way it did, and he had things placed in the background just right, and he was dressed to a T. It was well done. I have to give it to him. Just last week, Zuleika, who joined us from a very, seemed like a tropical, warm destination down south, that's pretty hard to beat. And of course, then there's Farah Nasser, who is an anchor for Global in Toronto, and she has a professional setup at home. So how are you going to compete with that? I was a bit nervous. It reminded me of something on Twitter. On Twitter, there's an account that's called the Room Rater, and it rates the background on Zoom calls of people who are on Zoom. And I'm wondering if you can do that for me. Send me a note, comment on this video, or find me on Instagram or Twitter, and let me know what you think of this background. Does it match up to the backgrounds that you've seen on other Friday Night Reflections? I hope so. I quite like this office, and maybe I can pick up a guitar later on. And if you're a musician and you find me on Twitter or Instagram, send me a message. Let me know. Maybe we can jam, virtually, of course. The vaccine and the possibilities beyond the vaccine are very exciting. It's begun to be rolled out in Canada, and maybe more vaccines around the corner for quicker uptake and us being able to get out of our house even quicker. So that's what we're going to focus on tonight's episode. The vaccine for COVID-19 and any questions that you might have. Many of you submitted questions online in text format or in video, and we're excited to have a panel of experts join us today to answer those questions. So thank you for submitting those. I know there's some useful information coming soon, and you'll leave this episode with more comfort about the vaccines and answers to your questions. But to start the show, I'd like to welcome Darkhana Mukhi Dr. Nazmuddin Bhanji. Aside from being our very own Darkhana Mukhi, Dr. Bhanji also maintains a busy pediatric practice in Vancouver alongside his teaching responsibilities in the Faculty of Medicine at UBC. So please join me in welcoming Mukhi Dr. Bhanji.
My brothers and sisters, Ya Ali Madad, the last 12 months have been challenging for many of us as we have faced COVID-19 as families, as a community, as a Jamaat, and as Canadians. In my role as Mukhi of Darkhana Jamat, as well as in my professional capacity as a physician, over the past few months, I have seen, like many of you, the impact of COVID-19 on the lives of families and individuals who become sick with this virus, or worse, have lost loved ones during this pandemic. So tonight, let us take a moment to remember all those who have left us during this year and who have suffered as a result of this terrible illness. Let us all pray to the Almighty that their souls may rest in eternal peace. In Islam we say, Inna illahi wa inna lillahi raji'un, which means from Allah we have come and to Allah we will return. Inshallah, this realization that we will all one day return to our spiritual home will give those of us grieving the irreparable loss of a loved one strength and hope. And to all of you who have lost loved ones, we pray that God grant you the strength needed during these very difficult times. As you will all know, there is some light at the end of this tunnel, with new vaccines being brought to market over the last few weeks. But we must remain vigilant. We must remain vigilant. In his talika to the Worldwide Jamaat on November 3rd, 2020, Maulana Hazrat Imam reminded us, my Jamaat should remain aware that there is no room for complacency over the risks posed by the highly contagious coronavirus. The need for wearing masks, observing physical distancing, and adhering to all the required hygiene protocols remains paramount and should be treated as part of normal life for some time to come. Many countries are now seeing a resurgence of COVID-19 cases, which demands that my murids should take personal responsibility to protect themselves, their families, and their communities by carefully following the guidelines of government and public health authorities. The work on producing vaccines and other forms of therapies is advancing at a rapid pace, and inshallah, over the coming months, we will see positive results, which in due course will be beneficial to the Jamaat and the population at large. Alhamdulillah, these COVID vaccines to which the Imam referred are now being administered in Canada, and inshallah, over the coming months, every member of our Jamaat will have the opportunity to be vaccinated. As our beloved Imam noted, these vaccines will be of great benefit to all of us, and it will be important for all who are in a position to do so to take advantage of this opportunity to get the vaccine when our turn comes. Our Imams have consistently looked to science to help solve the health challenges of their time. And in the 1890s, when the plague was spreading across India, Maulana Sultan Muhammad Shah invited a prominent scientist to conduct vaccine research at one of his residences, where the Imam of the time set up a fully functioning lab for this purpose. Once the vaccine for the plague was developed and tested, Maulana Sultan Muhammad Shah was one of the first to receive the vaccine publicly, so that the whole Jamaat could see their Imam receiving the very same vaccine they would soon receive, thus assuring them of the vaccine's safety. What a wonderful lesson for all of us. Tonight we will explore vaccines, something that is particularly topical at this time. So I hope you will take the time to learn and understand why it is so important that when the vaccine is available to you, that you indeed take it. Again, let us all pray for peace, for prosperity, good health, a return to normalcy, and let us also pray that the souls of loved ones lost may rest in peace. Ya Ali Madad.
Thank you, Mukhi Sahib, for sharing those thoughts and for reminding us of those who have been so deeply impacted by this pandemic. It's now my pleasure to welcome and introduce our expert panel of speakers who will be looking to answer your questions about COVID-19 and vaccinations. Dr. Hamidah Meghani is the Commissioner and Medical Officer of Health for Halton Region. In this role, she leads local public health activities and oversees Halton Region paramedics. She is a public health and preventative medicine physician. Dr. Meghani has a Master's of Public Health in Family and Reproductive Health from Columbia University and a Master's in Management Health Leadership from McGill University. Hamidah is passionate about public health, prevention of illness, and increasing health equity. Dr. Shainoor Ismail is a Royal College specialist in public health and preventative medicine and the former Deputy Chief Medical Officer of Health for Alberta. She is currently the Senior Medical Specialist with the Centre for Immunization and Respiratory Infectious Diseases of Canada and authored Canada's vaccine recommendations for COVID-19, which are being used by public health jurisdictions internationally. As an associate physician at the Metro City Medical Clinic in inner city Edmonton, Dr. Ismail has a special interest in marginalized populations and health equity. We are delighted to welcome her back to the show. And finally, Dr. Karim Ali joined Niagara Health in 2012 and established the Division of Infectious Diseases. He currently serves as the Director of the Division of Infectious Diseases and Antimicrobial Stewardship Program at Niagara Health. He is also the Pandemic Preparedness Lead for the organization. Dr. Ali is involved in multiple national and international clinical trials for COVID-19 and is an Assistant Adjunct Clinical Professor in Infectious Diseases at McMaster University. He also volunteers with Positive Living Niagara and their Streetworks program. Welcome to all three of you. So welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for being a part of this discussion. I know I can't be the only one who has been looking forward to it because it's such an important topic. So let's get right into it. In terms of who should be getting this vaccine, we know that the people who are at higher risk are getting the vaccine first. So are there people in the Jamaat who are at higher risk, and will they be prioritized? Dr. Ismail, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Shahid, anybody can be infected with the virus and become sick. I mean, as of this week in Canada, there have been over 800,000 cases of COVID-19 and over 20,000 Canadians have lost their lives. And behind those numbers, there are hundreds of thousands of others who are grieving and struggling because of the pandemic. So any one of us can get COVID, but there are some people who are at increased risk of exposure to the virus, and there are some people who are at increased risk of severe disease that could result in hospitalization or death. And unfortunately, we don't have enough vaccines for everyone yet. So expert advisory committees have prioritized groups who are at highest risk to get the vaccines first. And the priority groups for the first stage of the vaccine rollout have already been identified. So people who live or work in long-term care facilities, frontline healthcare workers, and those over 70 years of age and older. And the national recommendations for the next 2 stages of vaccine rollout will be released very soon. And the priority groups may differ between provinces because of the differences in logistics and epidemiology. But let's talk about who in our Jamaat is at highest risk and maybe in those priority groups. So certain ethnic groups like South Asians have been found to be disproportionately affected by COVID. So in Canada, for example, when you look at data on mortality rates from COVID-19 from across the country, we see that areas with the highest proportion of visible minorities had a rate of death that was twice as high as areas with the lowest proportion of visible minorities. So why are we seeing this increased risk? Well, you're at an increased risk of exposure to the virus if you live or work in crowded settings. And we know that people of color are more likely to work in frontline jobs like healthcare or food industries. So they're more likely to be exposed to the virus, in their interactions with other people. And then they come home where multiple generations are living, like I did, growing up with my brothers and my mom and dad and ma and bapa. It was so much fun, but there are more people in the home exposed to the virus. And of course, you can decrease your risk of exposure if you wear a mask or physically distance and wash your hands. Now, our Jamaat may be at increased risk of severe disease from COVID for a number of different reasons as well. And the evidence has been very clear. The risk of severe disease increases the older you get over 50. And the risk of hospitalization and death is especially high in those over 70. And there's mounting evidence that certain high-risk medical conditions can put you at increased risk of severe disease. So for example, obesity, heart failure, and diabetes. And diabetes, we know, is common among South Asians. And something else that may put members of our Jamaat at increased risk is decreased access to healthcare and vaccines. So if there are language barriers or difficulties traveling to a clinic or a hospital when you first have symptoms, treatment can be delayed, and that can result in progression of severe disease. Now, one concerning trend that we've been seeing is that people of color are less willing to get a COVID vaccine. And there was a survey done in January this year that showed that 1 in 3 people who identify as a visible minority were not willing to get a vaccine compared to 1 in 5 from the general population. And hesitancy to get vaccines in general is a real issue. I mean, vaccine hesitancy was cited by the World Health Organization as one of the top global health threats in 2019, even before the pandemic. But we're lucky, right? We have guidance from our Imam. And in his message to us on December 13th, he told us to be guided by the advice and directives of the health authorities to benefit from the protection vaccines will provide. So I hope the discussion we have today can help provide the information that our Jamaat needs to make informed decisions to protect themselves and their families.
Well, thank you so much for that thorough answer. And based on your answer there, I'm sure this discussion will be very helpful. One of the other questions that I've heard, myself so much is about side effects. So what do we know so far about side effects of the existing vaccines and the risk of severe illness from the vaccine itself? If I have to weigh the risk of getting or suffering from COVID-19 versus the risk of the side effects of the vaccine, which is worse, Dr. Ismail?
So that's a great question. And it's a great way to make an informed decision, weigh the risks for each with the of each choice with the evidence. So let's start with the risks of COVID disease. So in Canada, of the people diagnosed with COVID-19, about 1 in 13 will end up in the hospital and 3 in 100 will die. And we're also seeing evidence of long-term consequences from COVID-19. It's believed that about 1 in 10 COVID patients may still have symptoms for even a year after they initially got sick, and they're called the long haulers. And symptoms can range from what people describe as a brain fog or weakness and fatigue to even reduced lung function or kidney function. In fact, I had a colleague in our clinic who was infected and hospitalized with COVID, and it was 2 months before he was back at work, and he still isn't able to work a full day or even walk up a flight of stairs without getting short of breath. And he was a healthy guy in his early 30s. So it can happen to anyone, and we still don't know why. So then let's talk about the risks of the vaccine. So vaccination is like a practice test. The vaccine presents your immune system with a question, and your body has to do the work to develop the answer in the form of an immune response. And this means that when you get a vaccine, you expect side effects because these are the signs that the vaccine is working and your body is working to develop an immune response. It's like studying for a test or working out, right? No pain, no gain. But in terms of the numbers, at least 1 in 10 people who are vaccinated will get some temporary pain or swelling at the injection site, some tiredness, maybe some muscle aches, and possibly a fever. And with the mRNA vaccines, some side effects are more common after the second dose. And with the AstraZeneca vaccine, side effects are less common after the second dose. But for any of the vaccines, the side effects are short-term and mild to moderate. So now you have to weigh the long-term serious risks of the disease versus the short-term mild to moderate risk of side effects from the vaccine.
Okay, well, thank you so much for that, and we'll come back to you for some more questions as we continue our discussion here. But I want to move on to talking about getting the vaccine, and of course, that question about side effects is related to that. One question that was posed by several of our Jamati members for our town hall, and specifically from Akbar in Toronto, was how will we know when to register for the vaccine, and will we have to register online? I'm sure that's on so many people's minds. Why don't we go to Dr. Meghani for this one?
Thanks so much. So I can certainly appreciate that is the top question on everyone's mind is when will I be able to get the vaccine and how do I register? How do I know I'm eligible, right? So I would say that there's 3 things you need to do to get prepared for when it's your turn. So first of all, you need to pay attention to what your province's plan is to roll out the vaccine, which means trying to figure out where you fall into that prioritization scheme that Dr. Ismail talked about earlier. So what age are you? Are you a special class of worker, such as a healthcare worker or some other type of essential worker? You need to know where you fit into your province's grand scheme of the rollout. And every province will have a slightly different take on that. The other thing that you need to pay attention to is look at your local public health's website. That information will be updated on a regular basis. So I would suggest that you keep looking at that website on a weekly basis, and it will inform you as to when you might expect to get the vaccine. And also it will give you information on how to register for the vaccine. So different provinces, again, will have different ways of doing that. In Ontario, where I am, we are looking at a central registration and booking system that will be made available online. But for people who are not used to using the internet, there will be other mechanisms in place to help them pre-register as well. And finally, probably the last thing you can do to make sure that you know when it's your turn is to make sure that your family doctor's office and your pharmacist has your most up-to-date contact information, because there is a chance that they might be the ones calling you to tell you that it's your turn to get vaccinated.
Okay, that's great. Dr. Ali, let's bring you into the discussion now, and thank you for waiting so patiently. We've got a video question from Nida.
I have a question about population of young and healthy individual. If they can bear the complications of the virus, do they still need to take the vaccine? I'm thinking about the efficacy of the vaccines. If we do take the vaccines, what are the short-term and long-term effects of the vaccine?
So thank you, and this is an excellent question. I would say vaccines are always safer than the disease that they try to protect you against. Yes, there is this thought that maybe I'm young, I'm healthy, and if I just get the disease, for most of us, it's just going to be just a head cold, and we would be over it. But like Dr. Ismail mentioned earlier in this, that there are people who are going to get severe disease, and some of them are going to be healthy with no apparent risk factors. So it is going to be very important for us to consider taking the vaccine. As to the question about long-term side effects of this vaccine, this pandemic is a year or so old right now. Okay, there is more and more confidence that these vaccines that we work with or that are approved right now have not shown any long-lasting effects. Most people, as Dr. Ismail has mentioned, have short-term aches and pains that eventually do go away. So I want to reassure that this is something that we will just have to go through and make sure that, not getting the disease is going to be important for us.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you. That's perfect. And one last question here about getting the vaccine generally. And I'm going to go back to Dr. Ismail here for this one. The question is from Salima in Toronto. And it is it a good idea to take Tylenol and Advil before or after the vaccine? I assume that question is, with regards to the pain and some of the swelling that you were talking about.
Yeah, exactly. If the side effects are bothersome, you can treat them with something like Tylenol or Advil, but after vaccination. You don't want to interfere with the immune response by taking these medications before immunization because they could potentially reduce the effectiveness of the vaccine. There was a study out of Duke University that found that children who took pain relievers before getting their childhood vaccines had fewer antibodies than those who didn't, which could mean less protection. And in the clinical trials of the COVID vaccines, people were allowed acetaminophen or ibuprofen if they needed them after getting the vaccine, but not before. So you can also try what our parents would tell us to do when we weren't feeling well, like rest, put a cold compress for pain at the injection site, and drink lots of fluids for a fever. Parents know best, right? That's what I tell my kids, but they don't believe me.
Me too. I do the same. Okay, well, thank you for that. Let's move on to a different topic, somewhat different in that so far we've been talking about the vaccine or the vaccines and specifically the approved ones, but we know that there are more vaccines out there. And so we've had lots of questions that have come in about the different vaccines. So I'll summarize it with this one question. What is the difference between all the vaccines we're hearing about and what are the disadvantages or advantages of each of them? And why don't we start with the difference between the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, which are the ones that are currently approved in Canada, Dr. Ismail?
Yeah, so it's pretty confusing. There's hundreds of vaccines out there in clinical trials, but there are a total of 7 vaccines that could eventually become available to Canadians. And all of them present the spike protein to our immune system. So the spike protein is like a key on the surface of the virus, and that opens the door to your cells and causes all sorts of chaos. And if you can get rid of that key, then you can get rid of the virus. So those 7 vaccines fall into 3 main categories based on the different technologies that deliver the spike protein to our immune system in a different way. So they fall into the categories of the mRNA vaccines, which you mentioned, the viral vector vaccines, which are coming along, and the protein subunit vaccines. So the mRNA vaccines were the first to be authorized in Canada, the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. And interestingly, the first vaccines in Canada were rolled out on Hazar Imam's birthday, December 13th, when we got that Talika where he mentioned vaccines. So the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines use the genetic code of the spike protein in the form of mRNA. And the mRNA is like a recipe for your cells with instructions on how to make the spike protein. But like the mail, the recipe can't be delivered to your cells without an envelope because the mRNA is really unstable. So it's wrapped up in an envelope of fat. And then your cells receive the recipe and then start baking a bunch of spike proteins. And your immune system uses those proteins as practice questions to develop antibodies so that it's ready when the real virus with the real spike proteins test your immune system. So these types of vaccines have been researched for over a decade, and they've been used in experimental vaccines, but the COVID vaccine is the first of this kind to be authorized. And the main advantage of the mRNA vaccines is that they have very high efficacy against COVID disease. So they're 95% protective across all adult age groups, including the elderly. And 95% is really high. I mean, if my kids got 95% on a test, I'd be pretty happy. But what 95% efficacy means is that out of 100 people who get vaccinated, 95 of them won't get the disease. And we use the term efficacy when we're talking about the results in clinical trials, which is in a controlled setting. And we use the term effectiveness in the real world setting where it's not as controlled. But we still expect the vaccine effectiveness to be pretty high. Now, another advantage of the mRNA vaccines is that they're easy to make, which is why they were first out of the gate. And this means that they're also really easy to change to make them effective against variants or changes in the virus. But the disadvantage is that they require cold storage and special freezers because that mRNA is so fragile. Now, the two viral vector vaccines that we may see added as the next tools in the toolbox are the AstraZeneca vaccine and the Johnson & Johnson vaccines. And the AstraZeneca vaccine has been authorized in some other countries like the UK, and Health Canada will be making a decision on this vaccine very soon. So these vaccines use DNA instead of mRNA for the genetic code of the spike protein. And this DNA is wrapped in a different envelope for delivery. The envelope is a harmless virus called the adenovirus that causes the common cold. But the adenovirus has been modified so it can't replicate and it can't cause infection. So your cells receive that recipe in the form of DNA, and then they start baking the spike protein. And the technology for this type of vaccine has been used before for the Ebola vaccine, so it's not brand new. Now, the advantage of these vaccines are that they are stable in the fridge because DNA is less fragile than mRNA. So they may be easier to access than the mRNA vaccines. But the main disadvantage is that the AstraZeneca vaccine has a lower efficacy of around 62%. And the level of protection in adults 65 and older is still uncertain. So the mRNA may be better for those who are in the highest risk groups because of the higher level of protection. But any vaccine is better than no vaccine. And remember, back in early 2020, when we didn't have any COVID vaccines, the regulators said they'd be happy with vaccines that had at least 50% efficacy. So 62% isn't that bad. And then the last category of vaccines is the protein subunit vaccine. And that's where the Novavax vaccine falls into. Now, this type of vaccine delivers the spike protein itself into your cells. So there's no genetic code. But it needs something called an adjuvant to boost your immune system. So let's say your spike protein is Nankatai, right? If you deliver the Nankatai alone, it may not be as good as if you deliver that Nankatai dipped in some chai. Then your response is even better. So that chai is like an adjuvant. It boosts your response and makes it better. And this technology has been used for over 50 years for common vaccines like hepatitis B and whooping cough. So the advantages are that it's well known and it's stable, but the disadvantage is that they're complex to manufacture and take time to make. So inshallah, by the fall of 2021, we should have enough vaccines for everyone in Canada. But until then, it's especially important for those at the highest risk to follow the recommendations and get the vaccine as soon as possible.
It's really complex and fascinating stuff, and it's even more so when you think of how quickly it was done. And we asked the question, when can we get vaccinated? But you've gone into detail about how much goes into the vaccines before they're actually ready to go. And so let's move on to another question. This one's from Shalina in Vancouver, and Dr. Meghani, I'll ask you this one. The question is it safe and effective to mix and match vaccines? So if you receive a Pfizer shot for your first dose and a Moderna shot for your second, is that safe? And is it even offered?
That's a really great question, and it's actually one I had to tackle very recently. That's because in my region of Ontario, we only have access right now to the Pfizer vaccine. We in Halton did not get the Moderna vaccine. And so what's happened is that we have individuals who were in another region, they got a dose of Moderna, and then they've moved into our region, into one of our long-term care facilities, and now are looking for a second dose, and we don't have Moderna. So we've had to recently tackle this. and then we've had to figure out a way for them to get that second Moderna dose. From a safety perspective, there aren't any real theoretical concerns about the interchangeability, but right now we don't have data on the interchangeability of the vaccine from an effectiveness standpoint. So Dr. Ismail talked a little bit about that. And what I will say is that right now, from a theoretical perspective, because Pfizer and Moderna are so much alike, their backbone per se is very similar, although some of the vaccine components may be different. There is a chance that in the future we'll be able to mix and match. So we could use 1 dose of Pfizer and 1 dose of Moderna down the road if necessary. But for the time being, what we're saying is that we really should be trying to use the same vaccine until we learn a lot more. So trying to stick to the same vaccine as part of your vaccine regimen is important. If for whatever reason you get a shot of Pfizer and then your next dose is Moderna, we're not recommending restarting the series. So you're not going to get a third shot of something else. So not to worry about that.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. Our next question is from Gulshan and Anar. It's two people asked this question. I'm sure more are interested. Gulshan and Anar are from Vancouver and Calgary, and you can see why they might be interested in this question. And I'll point this one to you, Dr. Ali. It's, do vaccines contain pork ingredients, and should we be concerned about that?
So again, an excellent question. And so the short answer is no, they don't contain any pork or porcine material. And, I had to do we had to do some digging to make sure that, the information that we are giving is correct. And I was able to reach out to our colleagues in the Canadian Muslim COVID task force, and through imams there, they have been able to confirm that this vaccine is considered free of pork ingredients, and they have gone as far to say that this is halal. And one thing that one can look at is one of the highest rates of vaccinations around the world is in the country of Israel. And we know that these food laws would apply there too. So that kind of gives us a bit of confidence that there are no pork products in these vaccines.
Okay, thank you. And I'll ask you another question, Dr. Ali. Dr. Ismail mentioned this term a little bit earlier, but for those that aren't aware of it, can you discuss what a COVID-19 long hauler is?
So yes, and there are new things that we are learning about this. And previously, the thought was that, okay, coronaviruses are mostly, they cause an acute illness, and you get over it and you're done. What we have learned about this particular virus with COVID-19 is there is a subset of individuals, a subset of patients that do have symptoms that last for a long time. And, previously my answer used to be, well, this is a short-term disease. We just don't know much about it. There is more and more evidence out there. And there is, in fact, a recent study, an observational study in the British Medical Journal, or BMJ, that showed that there were some individuals who had, in that subset, 76% of individuals had symptoms lasting for 6 months or more. And they had at least one symptom, most common, like Dr. Ismail had mentioned, it was fatigue. But there are some people who have not regained their breathing functions and their strength 6 to 8 months out. So I hope this answers the question, right? So again, it goes back to this point that it's better not to have this disease and to prevent ourselves from getting it. And when it's our time, to make an informed decision about getting the vaccine.
Okay, thank you. So let's finish this portion of the discussion on the different vaccines and the doses with a video question from Farzan in Quebec.
Yeah, I'm that. So in Quebec, originally, they had planned to give out 2 doses of the vaccine, but rather transition to giving out only one to as many people as possible instead. And I was wondering, what are the differences in effectiveness, if any, of only having 1 dose of the vaccine rather than 2 doses as originally planned?
Sure, that's a really good question. And it just shows how quickly the situation is evolving because of limitations in vaccine supply and because of how closely these vaccines are being studied, with lots of evidence emerging every day. And so all the vaccines so far have been authorized as 2 doses because that's how the clinical trials were conducted. And the national and international recommendations so far have been to get both doses. You know, just like your evening prayers, say both your duas, get both your doses. But, you know, because we don't have enough vaccine for everyone yet, we've been looking at the evidence to see if we can offer some protection to twice as many people with 1 dose, rather than offering 2 doses to half the number of people. So it takes about 1 to 2 weeks after receiving a vaccine to mount an immune response and get that protection. And when you look at the clinical data from after the first 2 weeks, it shows that the protection from the mRNA vaccines is still really high, like over 90%. And even though the interval between doses is authorized for 3 weeks between the first and second dose for the Pfizer vaccine and 4 weeks between the doses from the Moderna vaccine, some people in the trials got the second dose up to 6 weeks after the first. And so that's why the recommendation is now that you can get the second dose 4 to 6 weeks after the first dose, and it should be fine. Now, I mean, for the AstraZeneca vaccine, the trials seem to show that the longer the interval between the doses, the better the protection. So the authorized schedule being 4 to 12 weeks between doses, you can actually wait 12 weeks between your first and second dose of the AstraZeneca vaccine, especially when the vaccine supply is limited. But, you know, like I said, the evidence is constantly emerging, and there are many studies going on to determine how long the protection from 1 and 2 doses lasts, and whether 1 dose is good enough. And the recommendations may change based on the results of these studies. But for now, the national recommendation is to get 2 doses of the vaccines. And the international recommendation is still to say 2 duas in the evening.
Good advice all around. All right, so let's get into some questions about specifically who should be getting the vaccines and some questions around it. Of course, you've all mentioned if you can get the vaccine, you should get the vaccine. But this next question, which comes from Zoya, is a video question, and it's really interesting.
I have a question. If the vaccine is safe, why aren't kids getting it?
So currently, both the Pfizer and Moderna vaccine that we have available in Canada are not approved for use in children, and that's because the clinical trials didn't include children and youth. And so as a result, they're not approved for use here in Canada in that age population. However, I think we can expect data soon on whether this population can be included. And at that point in time, we'll wait for Health Canada to authorize that use and for the recommendation to come out from the National Advisory Committee on Immunization. And then at that point in time, you'll see the rollout of the vaccine to this population. Thankfully, we know that kids don't get severe disease the way that adults, especially our seniors, do. In that way, while it's important to immunize children as part of our greater immunization strategy to make sure that we're protecting our whole community, at least we need to start right now by immunizing the people who are getting sick the most, and that's our seniors, and then eventually into different age groups, and hopefully we're able to vaccinate all of our adults, and then we'll get to the kids later.
Okay, and we've got another question that's similar to that one. It's from Karina in Toronto. The question is the vaccine safe for new mothers or mothers who are breastfeeding? And Dr. Meghani, why don't you handle that one as well?
So this is another area that we don't have enough information about, right? We're still learning a lot about the virus, and we're still learning a lot about the vaccine. So again, we don't have enough information based on the clinical trials that were done on these vaccines that are available to us right now about pregnant or breastfeeding women. However, there doesn't seem to be any theoretical concern about excretion of any of the vaccine components into breast milk. So what I will say is that if you get immunized during your pregnancy or if you get immunized while you're breastfeeding, don't stop breastfeeding. It's one of the most important things that you can do from a public health perspective to keep your child healthy. So experts suggest that women who become eligible for the vaccine and are considering getting pregnant or trying to conceive, that they perhaps should wait at least 1 to 2 months after getting the vaccine to try and get pregnant. The best thing you can do is that if you are pregnant and you want to get the vaccine, talk to your family doctor, get the facts, and then make an informed decision.
Okay, thank you. So the next question is probably not a surprise to you, and let's go to Dr. Ali for this question. It was asked by Niza in Toronto. Also, Azmina asked Azmina asked the question on video.
The current vaccines that we have, namely Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna, how do these work with the new variants?
So again, this is an excellent question, and that was the first thing that came to our mind when, as soon as we started hearing about the variants of concern. And there is more and more confidence, and in fact, both Moderna and Pfizer vaccine are okay against the variant that was first identified in United Kingdom, and also the variant that was first identified in South Africa. And the variant that was first identified in Manaus region in Brazil, it is too early, but the studies are ongoing as to whether the vaccines are going to be effective against them or not. So the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines are okay still against the UK, the variant that was first identified in United Kingdom, and also the one that was first identified in South Africa. Now, I want to just add something here, and that's the messenger RNA-based vaccines are fascinating, as Dr. Both Ismail and Dr. Meghani had gone over the details. These vaccines are also very adaptable, and the good thing about these vaccines would be if there is a change that needs to be made in these vaccines against, let's say a variant that is identified over time, then these can be made quickly. It remains to be seen that right now, if a variant arises where the vaccine would be ineffective, how quickly can we pivot and adapt into developing a newer or more targeted vaccine against that. To add to that, the AstraZeneca vaccine has shown reduced activity against the variant that was first identified in South Africa, and the trials the AstraZeneca vaccine rollout has been held off in South Africa for now until there is more data and there is some more, whether they adapt the vaccine to it or not.
Well, that's some of that is certainly probably a relief to our viewers and our Jamaat here, knowing that the vaccines are still somewhat or still effective for some of these variants. So that's good. And it's great that you guys are here to share your information as these variants develop and new information comes to light. So thank you again for being here and sharing your expertise. We've only got a few more questions left. There were many questions submitted, and so this question was submitted by multiple people. And I think it will depend on certainly the location where we are and how many vaccinations have been administered. But the question is, has there been any severe reactions to the vaccine? And Dr. Ismail, you touched on this a bit earlier, so why don't you take this one?
Sure, that's an important question for people to ask. Now, in the clinical trials, tens of thousands of people were vaccinated, and there were no serious reactions in the months that they were followed. And since the vaccines were authorized for use, millions more people have been vaccinated, and there have been no serious safety signals. Now, these vaccines are highly scrutinized all over the world, so we will all hear about any severe reactions that may or may not be a result of the vaccines. You know, the virus isn't the only thing that spreads fast during a pandemic. Information and misinformation spreads pretty fast too. But don't trust everything you hear on social media. Every severe reaction that is detected will be investigated by safety experts. And it's the results of these careful investigations that you want to listen to. So when you hear about a severe reaction, it's really important to think about three things. How common is it? How severe is it? And is it actually caused by the vaccine? So for example, we've heard about severe allergic reactions or anaphylactic reactions to the mRNA vaccines. And any medication can cause severe allergic reactions. Most anaphylactic reactions happen within 30 minutes, and they can be treated with an EpiPen, which would be on hand in the clinic where you get vaccinated. In terms of how common it is, there was a report from the CDC that found that the risk of anaphylaxis after a COVID vaccine is about 11 in a million doses. Now, to put that into perspective, your risk of dying in a car accident is about 1 in 100. So the relative risk is much, much higher, but people keep driving. And no one has died because of a COVID vaccine, but people have died because of COVID. Now, causality is really important to understand as well. You know, it's human nature to draw a connection between events, especially if they happen close together. But it doesn't mean that one caused the other. Like my son, the other day came home from school with only one glove. And I asked him, "Tariq, why did you lose your glove?" And he says to me, "It's because you gave me tomatoes for lunch." Now, the two events were related in time, but contrary to what Tariq thinks, one did not cause the other. So you may have heard about reports out of Norway where, unfortunately, some nursing home residents who were frail and elderly lost their lives. And there were media headlines saying that the vaccine caused these deaths. But a team of international safety experts reviewed the details of the reports, and they concluded that there was no evidence that the vaccine caused the deaths. The unfortunate reality is that every day, an average of about 45 people in Norwegian nursing homes pass away, regardless of vaccination. So remember the balance of risks that we talked about earlier. The risk of severe COVID disease is especially high in the elderly. And you can manage the risks of the vaccine. So if you do get side effects, drink water for fever. You know, it's important to stay hydrated and take Tylenol or Advil if you need to after the vaccine.
Okay, and speaking of that vigilance, and we'll stick with you for this one, Dr. Meghani, this next question is also from Toronto, or the Six, as I've heard it's called. Arisa is asking the question, is it more protective to wear 2 masks as opposed to just one?
Well, that's a great question, Arisa. And I know that it's on a lot of people's minds because we've been hearing a lot in the news. Certainly the CDC is looking at this issue. So it is under review. So what I will say is that for now, what we really need to do is to make sure that you're wearing your mask properly. That's the most important thing, rather than worrying about wearing 2 masks. Masks are most effective when they are worn correctly. And so I'll just give you a few things that you need to do to make sure that you're wearing your mask properly. So first of all, starting with the actual mask, try to make sure, if it's possible, to have a 3-layer mask with the middle layer being the filter layer. But lots of us have 2-layer masks, and that's okay. You don't need to throw it away. But when you're ready for a new mask, then get a 3-layered mask if possible. Some people might have a 2-layered mask with a bit of an insert, a pocket, and you can then slide in a piece of cloth or a paper towel, and that then becomes your 3-layered mask. You want to make sure that your mask is fitting around your nose and your mouth well, so that all areas of your lower face are covered. Then there's no gaps along your cheeks. And so that's probably what's leading some people to wear 2 masks, to create that snug fit. You want to clean your hands before and after putting on and taking off your mask. And you want to make sure that you're just touching the straps of your mask. Try not to touch the actual mask itself when you're either putting it on, taking it off, or sometimes during the day, people have a habit of touching their face. So try not to do that because you could contaminate your hands. And finally, if there's one thing that I could urge the Jamaat to do is don't discard your masks on the ground or in the shopping carts. I know it's not just me who's getting annoyed by seeing those dirty masks lying everywhere. So let's make sure that we keep our environment clean. When you do need to discard it, find a garbage can if it's one that's not reusable. And if you're using a reusable mask, make sure you store it in a clean place and wash it on a regular basis.
Perfect. Well, I want to thank you guys again for joining us. This is such an informative conversation. I'm certainly leaving the conversation way better informed, and I'll be looking out for any more information that you put out or our official sources and in the news to keep myself informed. But maybe as some final thoughts, Dr. Ali, you have a great deal of experience with vaccines and COVID in your professional capacity, but I understand that you've also had a personal experience with it through members of your family. Maybe as some final words, would you be willing to share about that experience and, of course, the importance of vaccines as a result?
Yes, thank you. And it's this virus has taken a toll on all of us in different ways. And back in January, so less than a month ago now, my family, my father and my uncles and aunts back in Karachi did come down with COVID. In fact, it was significant enough that they ended up being admitted to the Aga Khan hospital there, got care there and improved, and shukr, they are back home and doing okay. It brings to light this fact that nobody is safe because this is a pandemic, right? Like so all of us are exposed to it, and we have to try our best. There are situations where you cannot avoid, like multi-generational families and all. But I would say this, having seen patients with COVID and having my family go through this, it just reinforces the point that all of us have tried to make here, that prevention is still going to be the most important piece. And one thing we have mentioned is that the bundled approach to prevention, that is, keeping your physical distance, wearing a mask, a properly fitting mask, as Dr. Meghani mentioned, making sure we do proper hand hygiene, staying home if we are sick. And, inshallah, with this, we will get through this. When it's our turn getting vaccinated, making an informed choice again about getting vaccinated is going to be very, very important. I would say this is going to be, being in this, I am hopeful now than I was, let's say, back in November and December when we were talking about this. I am hopeful that the coming days are, inshallah, going to be better, and we really are looking at truly this light at the end of the tunnel. So those are some of my thoughts. Yep.
That's perfectly put, and I think we can leave it at that. Drs. Ali, Dr. Meghani, and Dr. Ismail, thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to talking to you again soon. Thank you again to the three doctors for joining us and answering your questions. And of course, thank you for submitting those questions. I hope you got your question answered. And if you didn't, you can always check out iicanada.org/COVID Corner for ongoing updates about vaccines and other COVID-related information as they develop. And as we know and as we heard, there's always news developing around COVID-19. So stay tuned to that website. If you have other questions about COVID or the vaccine, remember you can reach the Access Medical line by calling 1-888-536 3599 and following the prompts to ask a medical related question. So it's that time of the show where we get into some musical expression to soothe the soul. And I've been looking forward to this because I might just pick one of those guitars up and join in on the jam session, so to speak. Hope you will too. Hope you stick around and watch that. And I hope you stay safe, warm, happy Family Day. And we look to talk to you again. Yali Madad.
किया जो भी मुझको तूने करम किए जो भी मुझ पे तूने चुका ना सकूंगा खिदमतों से अपनी रहेंगी कोशिशें फिर भी हरदम अपनी
at your feet, but all I can do is thank you. All I can do is thank you, thank you, thank you.